Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing a review of the Inkworld trilogy by Cornelia Funke. So the first book in the trilogy is Inkheart, the second book is Inkspell, and the third book is Inkdeath. And these are books that were actually coming out and pretty popular, I think, when I was probably around middle school age, but I never read them at the time. But I have been reading them now. I've been reading them this year and really enjoying them. So I wanted to do a review for the trilogy because I just recently finished the final book. So I'm mostly going to be talking about the first book in terms of like describing what it's about, because I don't want to like spoil the trilogy. So this first book starts with following Mo and Maggie, who are father and daughter, and we learn that they have kind of been on the run in Maggie's entire life, and she didn't totally understand that that's what was going on. Her father, Mo, is a bookbinder, and she just always thought that when they had to move or travel, it was for his work, not because they were in hiding. But she finds out that they've actually been in hiding her whole life, because years ago, Mo discovered that he had the power to pull things out of books. So when he reads out loud, he's able to pull objects and characters out of the books that he is reading from into our world. And one day, years ago, he pulled a villain and a whole band of villains out of a book called Inkheart. And so he has kind of been on the run ever since then, and these villains are looking for him, and by extension, Maggie. So at the beginning of this book, Mo's past, these villains that he's pulled from the book kind of catch up with him, and he now has to deal with this and confront what happened all those years ago, and Maggie gets tangled up in it as well. So we meet a lot of characters from this magical ink world from the book Inkheart. There are all of the villains, but there are also some good characters or some neutral characters, and we're following Mo and Maggie as Maggie is learning about this magic. Mo is learning about it too, because he doesn't totally understand how it works. They find out what these villains have been up to all of these years, and trying to save themselves and the people that they are close to from these villains from this magical book world. And then in the later books, in Inkspell and Inkdeath, we get some perspectives actually from inside the ink world, so inside of this book world, and we get to learn more about how the magic works, how the world of Inkworld works, and it really expands into the world and the magic. Each book kind of pushes the boundaries a little bit of what is this world and how does this magic work? What can they do with this magic, and how much can they manipulate their surroundings or stories or things like that through the use of this like storytelling magic that they have, and they're always kind of testing the limits of this world and these stories and this magic. I gave each of the books in the series I think 4 out of 5 stars. I think the second one, Inkspell, may have been more like 3.75, so slightly less than the other ones, but I really enjoyed each of these books in this series. One of the things that I loved about the series, and which is actually why I initially started reading it, is because it is a book about books. It is following Mo, who's a bookbinder. They are reading characters out of these books and using storytelling as a kind of magic. And so I really wanted to read some more books about books, and this definitely fulfills that. If you love books and storytelling, this one definitely follows a lot of themes of like the power of storytelling and using storytelling as actual magic, but it also has characters who very much like deeply love books, and they talk about their love of books and just how important storytelling and reading and books are to their lives. So if you like books that really are about book lovers, this definitely has that in it, and I really enjoyed those elements of the story. I feel like this story had some really interesting like themes to it. It definitely talked a lot about hubris, and some of the dangers of hubris, and also like entitlement in different forms, entitlement to your own creations, entitlement to control of other people's lives or control over your creations. It talks some about also like with storytelling and with books, who does the story belong to? Does it belong to the author? Does it belong to the audience? Does it belong to the people who consider themselves real fans, or just does it belong to everybody? And how does that affect the way that people approach stories and appreciate stories? I just thought that was a really interesting like theme throughout the book of entitlement to books and storytelling, and who do these stories truly belong to. I also felt like these books had a really rich world, especially from the perspectives within the Ink world. So we get into this magical world, and it is this like it is very magical. I do feel like sometimes the books were a little bit slow or a little bit too long. Like these two, like this is a chunky book. This one took forever to read. And I was listening to these on audiobook, and I still felt like this was just taking me forever to get through. I also really enjoyed the cast of characters in this. The characters in Ink Death especially started getting really frustrating to me, but that was more because in Ink Death, I think there are a couple of characters, or at least one in particular, who has really lost his way and needs to kind of rediscover himself and figure out who he is and what he values and how much is he going to stay true to himself, being pressured by those outside of himself. So I got really frustrated with this character, but I think it was because he was well written. His arc was done in an interesting way that brought up a lot of things about being true to yourself, and he was frustrating me when he wasn't being true to himself. So there were some characters in here that I got frustrated with or I found kind of annoying, but I think that was more because they were going through their own struggles and their own journey, and sometimes they were at a point where they were like going through something that was frustrating, and I feel like that was especially prevalent in this last book, so I was getting a little bit frustrated with some of the characters. And the last thing that I wanted to mention about these is, as I said, I was listening to these actually all on audiobook, and I really enjoyed them as audiobooks. I think it was a really nice way to consume these stories. My only complaint about it is that every single book had a different narrator. And like I got over it eventually, but it was always kind of jarring when I would first start the book. And the narrator would be different. They would pronounce names or words differently. They would give people different voices. I wish that they had had a consistent narrator throughout the series. I liked most of the narrators except the narrator for the final book, Ink Death. I didn't like the way that he voiced some of the characters, and they were just like, the voices were very different. The first two, even though they were different narrators, the pronunciation of some of the like words and names and the voices that they did for the characters were similar enough, but this one I feel like was very different. So that was probably just like my main complaint, but that's very specific to the audiobooks, not the quality of this series itself. But as I said, I really enjoyed this series. I gave pretty much all of these 4 out of 5 stars. It was a really fun series to read and really great if you're a book lover and you want books about books and books about book lovers. So that is all for my review of the Inkworld trilogy by Cornelia Funke. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.